Hi guys, this is Text Driller class economics. The topic of discussion is theory of demand. At the end of this class, you should be able to understand the meaning of demand. You should be able to know the classification of demand. You should be able to know the laws of demand. You should be able to know demand schedule, demand curve, angel curve. You should be able to understand the determinants of demand. We are going to look at the types of demand. You should be able to understand change in demand, change in quantity demanded, the difference between the two of them. You should be able to know what is called abnormal demand. Then you should be able to know the elasticity of demand and the types of elasticity of demand. Now let's begin with the meaning of demand. Now, when we talk about demand, we refer to buyers, consumers. So demand for goods and services refers to buyers and consumers. So demand refers to the quantity of goods and services that a consumer is willing and able to buy at a particular period and at a given price. So demand relates to buyers and customers of goods and services. It's important to know that demand is not want, because demand is the quantity of goods and services that a consumer is willing and able to buy. So the willingness and ability of consumers to pay for a commodity makes it a demand. Let's look at the other aspect, which is the classification of forms of demand. So we have two classification of demand. We have effective demand and ineffective demand. Effective demand is a form of demand that has consumers' willingness and ability to pay for a commodity. So if there's willingness and ability of consumers to pay for a commodity, there is an effective demand. Then ineffective demand is a form of demand that does not have willingness and ability of consumers to pay for a commodity. So ineffective demand is usually referred to as want. Let's look at the next subtopic, which has to do with laws of demand. Ceteris paribus. This is a Latin word, which means other things being equal. The higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded, and vice versa, which means other things being equal. When price of commodities increase, the quantity demanded of commodities by consumers will reduce, and when the price reduces, the quantity demanded for by consumers will increase. The next aspect is demand schedule. Demand schedule is used to further explain the laws of demand. Demand schedule is a table that shows an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded of consumers. So we have two kinds of demand schedule. We have the individual demand schedule and the market demand schedule. The individual demand schedule is a demand schedule that is meant for a particular consumer only in the market. For example, you have a table on your screen which is for Dre. So Dre's demand schedule, you can see the price and quantity demanded. At 1 naira, quantity demanded was 10 units. And when the price increased to 2 naira, quantity demanded reduced to 8 units. When the price increased to 3 naira, quantity demanded reduced towards 6 units. When the price was 4, quantity demanded reduced to 4 units. And when the price was increased to 5 naira, quantity demanded reduced to 2 units, which means that as price increases, quantity demanded reduces. This is to explain the laws of demand. Then we have the market demand schedule. Market demand schedule is a demand schedule that is meant for different consumers in a market. Let's take a look at a table. We have price of 1 naira to 5 naira, and we have different consumers. We have Dre, quantities demanded. We have Mr. B's quantity demanded. We have Mr. Excel's quantity demanded, and we have KOJ's quantity demanded. If you look at this quantity demanded at 1 naira, the quantity demanded by consumers differs. And if you add up all their quantity demanded, you get the total quantity demanded by these consumers, which means as the price increases, all their individual quantity reduces and the total quantity kept reducing. This is what we call market demand schedule. Then let's look at the other subtopic, which is demand curve. Demand curve is a graphical representation of indirect relationship between price and quantity demanded. So a graph that shows indirect relationship between price and quantity demanded is demand curve. As you can see on your screen, you can see the y-axis is the price, the x-axis is the quantity demanded. As price reduces, all right, as price increases, quantity demanded increase. As price reduces, quantity demanded increases. When we had 5 naira, quantity demanded was 2. When we have 4 naira, quantity demanded was 4. When we have 3 naira, quantity demanded was 6. When we have 2 naira, quantity demanded was 8. And when they had 1 naira, quantity demanded was 10 units. This shows that this further explains the laws of demand. As you can see from the note, that demand curve slopes downward from left to right, which is obeying the laws of demand. The relationship between price and quantity demanded is inverse, negative, or indirect. It was established from the laws of demand. From the laws of demand, we have it that ceteris paribus, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded, which shows that relationship between price and quantity demanded is inverse. Now let's take a look at angel curve. Angel curve is a graphical representation of relationship between consumers' income and quantity of goods demanded. We have two kinds of angel curve. We have the positive angel curve and we have the negative angel curve. The positive angel curve shows a direct relationship between consumers' income and quantity of goods demanded. As you can see on your screen, the graph, which means that as consumers' income increases, quantity of goods demanded will increase and vice versa. This shows that when income increases, quantity of goods demanded. When income reduces, quantity of goods what demanded reduces. This type of angel curve is meant for normal goods and ostentatious goods or luxury goods. The question is, what are normal goods? Normal goods are goods that consumers demand for without strings attached to them. So consumers demand them without any condition. So ostentatious goods or luxury goods are goods that consumers demand for in order to boost their ego. They are goods that consumers demand for so as which is meant for their social status, which means there are conditions for demanding for such commodity. So at higher income, consumers will demand more of such commodity. The next is let's look at example of ostentatious goods. They are your exotic cars, expensive phones, designer wares, and the likes. Now, negative angel curve is the angel curve that has indirect relationship between consumers' income and quantity of goods demanded. As you can see on the graph, as the income reduces, quantity of goods demanded increases and vice versa. So a negative angel curve is meant for inferior or given goods. And inferior goods is any commodity that has indirect relationship with consumers' income. An example is basic foodstuff and low quality product. So low income earners will buy more of basic foodstuff or low quality products at higher income, at lower income rather. At lower income, low income earners will buy more of basic foodstuffs and low quality products. At higher income, they'll buy less of them. That's an example of what? Negative angel curve. Let's take a look at the determinant of demand. Determinant of demand refers to the factors that influence quantity of goods demanded by consumers. And we have them on your screen. Number one, you have price of the commodity. From the laws of demand, you know the effect of price of the commodity on goods and services, which means that the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded and vice versa, other things being equal. Number two, price of other commodities. When we get to the types of demand, we understand more about price of other commodities. Number three is the income of consumers. Other things being equal, income has a positive relationship with quantity of goods demanded, which means other things being equal, the higher the income, the higher the quantity demanded, and vice versa. which means we are looking at the commodity as a normal good. If we are not considering condition, we ask ourselves, is the commodity an inferior goods or given goods? If the commodity is an inferior or given goods, it shows that such income we have indirect relationship with such consumers income we have indirect relationship with given goods or inferior goods, which means at higher income quantity demanded of given or inferior goods will reduce. At lower income, quantity demanded will increase. Then, if not consider conditions, if the commodity is an ostentatious goods or a luxury goods, which means that income of consumers is directly related to ostentatious or luxurious goods, which means at higher income, consumer will demand more of ostentatious goods. At lower income, they will demand less of ostentatious goods. Number four, we have tax imposed on consumers' income. The higher the tax, the lesser the disposable income of consumers, which means that tax determines the purchasing power of the consumers. If tax increases, quantity demanded will reduce because disposable income of consumers has reduced. And if tax reduces, disposable income will increase. Quantity demanded by consumers will also increase. Number next is government policies. Government policies influence quantity of goods demanded. As you can see, we are in the post-pandemic period. During the pandemic until date, consumers like us, we've bought so many sanitizers. We are still buying nose mask so as to prevent ourselves from the deadly virus. That is the policy of government. In order to be safe of the deadly disease, we are told to use nose mask, to sanitize or wash our hand regularly. So all these are policies made by the government which has made our demand for sanitizers and nose masks to increase. So policies of government increase quantity of goods demanded. Number six, expectation of future change in price of commodities. If there is if a consumer notices that the price of commodities will increase in future, consumers will buy more at present. If a consumer notices that price of commodities will fall in future, consumers will buy less at the moment. So weather condition also influence quantity of goods demanded. So if weather condition is not favorable to a commodity, consumer will buy less. If the weather condition is favorable, consumers will buy more. Number eight is influence of adverts, taste and fashion. Adverts increases quantity of goods demanded by consumers. Taste has to do with the preference of consumers. So preference of consumers also determine the quantity demanded by them. Fashion deals with what is trending. So what is trending also influence quantity of goods demanded by consumers. Number nine is population. Population of consumers influence quantity of goods demanded. So these are the factors that influence quantity of goods demanded by consumers. Let's look at the types of demand. Number one type of demand is joint demand. Joint demand is when two or more commodities are needed together in order to satisfy a want by a consumer. So the demand for one commodity by the consumer will necessitate the demand for the other commodity, which means the two commodities will be needed together in order to satisfy a want. So joint demand can also be called complementary demand. An example of joint demand is shirts and trousers. Milo and peak milk, they are needed together. Stove and kerosene, they are needed together. Bread and butter, needed together. Lens and frame, they are needed together to satisfy one. Phone and charger, they are needed together. So an important thing we need to know is that when there's an increase in price of one commodity, it will lead to a decrease in quantity demanded of the other commodity and vice versa. Reason being that if there's an increase in price of bread, quantity demanded for bread will reduce. Therefore, quantity demanded for butter needed to consume with bread will also reduce and vice versa. So another point you need to note is that when there's a decrease in quantity demanded of a commodity, it will lead to a decrease in quantity demanded of the other commodities. Anything that can make you decrease quantity demanded of trousers, it will make you decrease quantity demanded of shirts because they are needed together to satisfy a want. Let's go at number 2 type of demand, which is competitive demand. Competitive demand is when a commodity is needed in place of another commodity. So competitive demand refers to the demand for a close substitute. So close substitutes are products that serve same purpose as another product. So an example of competitive demand is Milo and Bonfita, Pepsi Cola and Coca-Cola, Fanta and Mirinda, Peak Milk and Loyal Milk. They are said to be commodities that serve same purpose. So they are close substitutes. All right. So the demand for one commodity will not necessitate the demand for the other commodity. So another name for competitive demand is substitute demand. So another name for competitive demand is substitute demand. So an increase in price of one commodity will lead to an increase in quantity demanded of the other commodity and vice versa. So when there's an increase in price of Pepsi Cola, people will demand less of Pepsi, so they will switch to Coca-Cola. So when there's an increase in price of one, it will lead to increase in quantity demanded of the other and vice versa. A decrease in quantity demanded of one will lead to an increase in quantity demanded of the other. So anything that can make consumers to decrease demand for peak milk, it means that consumers will increase the demand for loyal milk because they are needed together to satisfy a want. Let's look at the number 3 type of demand, which is derived demand. Derived demand is when a commodity is needed not for immediate satisfaction of wants, but for what it can help to produce. So if you need a commodity not for immediate satisfaction of wants, but for what it can help to produce, it is said to be what? A derived what? Demand. So commodity needed not for immediate satisfaction of wants, but for what it can help to produce is said to be what? A derived what? Demand. An example of derived demand is demand for the factors of production. So demand for factors of production such as land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. They are said to be what? Demand for the factors of production. So another name for demand for factor of production or derived demand is said to be indirect demand. Then the last type of demand is composite demand. Composite demand is when a commodity is needed for various purposes. If you need a commodity in order to serve so many uses, it's said to be what? A composite demand. An example is demand for flour. Flour serves so many uses. Demand for cassava. Cassava serves so many uses. Demand for palm kernel. They serve so many uses. So this is what refers to as what? Composite demand. So please note, we have 4 types of demand, which is joint demand, competitive demand, derived demand, and composite demand. Let's take a look at an important aspect that examiners usually test the understanding of students, which is change in quantity demanded. Change in quantity demanded is when different quantities of a commodity is demanded at different prices. So the reason why we have change in quantity demanded is because of changes in price of the commodity only. So it can also be called movement along the same demand curve. Another name for change in quantity demanded is movement along the same demand curve. So it is caused by changes in price of the commodity only. Now, this curve is to explain change in quantity demanded. As you can see, at price 2, we have quantity 2. When price increased to price 3, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. Quantity demanded fell to quantity 1. And when price reduced to quantity price 1, quantity demanded increased to quantity 3, which is the law of demand. So the downward and upward movement on the same demand curve is called change in quantity demanded. Change in quantity demanded can be divided into two. Number one, we have expansion of demand. Some school of thought can also call it extension of demand. So expansion of demand is increase in quantity demanded, and it is caused by a decrease in price of the commodity. So look at the diagram. You can see we add what? Price 2, and the quantity is quantity 1. So when price fell to price 1, quantity increased to quantity 3. So the increase in this quantity is caused by a decrease in price. So it's said to be expansion of demand. The other one is contraction of demand. Contraction of demand is a decrease in quantity demanded, which is caused by increase in price of the commodity. Let's take a look at the diagram to explain contraction of demand. At price 1, we had quantity 3. All right. Price increased to price 2. That means quantity will fall based on the law of demand to quantity 1. So the increase in this price led to a decrease in quantity. So you can see the arrow, which shows that there is a decrease in quantity demanded, which is caused by increase in price of the commodity. Now, this summary of change in quantity demanded is that we could have extension or expansion of demand or contraction of demand. Please note that when we talk about change in quantity demanded, we can have either increase in quantity demanded, known as extension or expansion of demand, or we could have decrease in quantity demanded, which is also known as contraction of demand, and they are caused by either increase or decrease in price of the commodity only. Now let's take a look at this other subtopic, which is change in demand. Yes, change in demand is different from change in quantity demanded. Change in demand is when different quantities of a commodity is demanded at a particular price. So when different quantities of a commodity, they are demanded at a particular price, and it occurs as a result of change in all factors that affect demand except price of the commodity, which means that change in demand is caused by all the factors that affect demand except price of the commodity. So another name for change in demand is shift in demand. Take a look at the diagram. As you can see the diagram, we have just one price, price 2. At price 2, we have quantity 1, we have quantity 2, we have quantity 3. At price 2, the first quantity is quantity 2, all right? Then the quantity reduced to quantity 1. At the same price, the quantity increased to quantity 3. Now, what are the things that can make the quantity increase to quantity 3 at the same price? It could be what? Favorable weather condition. It could be government policies, just the way we are demanding for sanitizers and nose masks, all right? Because of government policy, we've increased the demand and the price is still the same. So that's an example of reasons why the quantity could increase at the particular price. It could be because of increase in consumers' income. Price is constant. It could be because of increase in price of another commodity, all right? Or increase in price of complements, all right? So you are demanding more, all right? It could be as a result of decrease in price of complements. So when there's a decrease in price of complements, you are demanding more of this commodity with that. Yes, it could be as a result of increase in price of substitutes. Because of increase in price of substitutes, you are demanding more. So these are the reasons why consumers could demand more. It could be as a result of decrease in tax. So you have more money to buy at the same price. So what are the things that can make you consumers to demand less at the same price? It could be because of decrease in consumers' income. Consumer will buy less at the same price. It could be as a result of increase in tax of consumers. It could be because of bad weather condition. The weather condition is not favorable. Probably the commodity is ice cream and the weather is cold. You will buy less of the commodity at the same price. All right. It could be because of increase in price of complementary products. Products you need to consume with that commodity, the price has increased, so you need to demand less of it. It could be as a result of decrease in price of substitute. So you are demanding less of this so as to buy more substitute. But the fact there is that price of the commodity is constant. Let's look at the analysis of this diagram. All right, from the graph, you notice that D0 represent the initial demand curve, then D1, which is represents a rightward shift in the demand curve, and a rightward or an outward shift in demand curve means increase in demand. And D2 represents a leftward or an inward shift in the demand curve, which is a decrease in demand. Now let's look at this subtopic, which is abnormal demand. Abnormal demand is a kind of demand that does not obey the laws of demand, which means more quantity will be demanded at higher price while lesser quantity will be demanded at lower price. So a kind of demand that does not obey the laws of demand is what we call abnormal demand. It can also be called exceptional demand. So let's look at the abnormal schedule. Abnormal demand schedule. Abnormal demand schedule is a table that shows a direct relationship between price and quantity demanded. As you can see from the table, we have price, we have quantity demanded. We have 1 naira to 5 naira. As the price increases, quantity demanded increases, which shows that there's a direct relationship between price and quantity demanded. Let's look at abnormal demand curve. Abnormal demand curve is a graphical representation of a direct relationship between price and quantity demanded of a commodity. You can see as price increased from 1 naira to 5 naira, quantity demanded increased from 2 units to 10 units to show a direct relationship between price and quantity demanded. So this shows that abnormal demand curve slopes upward from left to right. What are the causes of abnormal demand? Number one is consumption of inferior goods by low-income earners. Low-income earners will buy more of inferior goods, even if the price increase, because they have no other substitute or no other alternative. Number two is consumption of ostentatious goods by high-income earners. High-income earners will continue to buy more of expensive goods because it enables them to show off, to show their social status. It boosts their ego. That's the reason why they are buying more of expensive goods at higher price. Number three, fear of future rise in price of commodity. Is there a future rise? Is there if a consumer is afraid that the price will increase in future, consumer will buy more at a higher price now because the consumer knows that the price will increase in future. Number four is consumption of scarce commodity. A commodity that is rare, that's not easy to come across. Consumer will buy more at higher price. Number five, consumption of commodity that is of necessity. So any commodity that is of necessity, consumers will buy more at higher price. Now let's move to elasticity of demand. Elasticity of demand measures the degree of responsiveness of demand to a change in the determinants of demand. And the determinants of demand that we are looking at are income of consumers, price of the commodity, and price of other commodities. So elasticity of demand explains how the determinants of demand, which is price of the commodity, income of consumers, and price of other commodities, how they influence the quantity of goods and services demanded by consumers. Now let's look at the types of elasticity of demand. We have three types of elasticity of demand. Number one is price elasticity of demand. Number two is income elasticity of demand. Number three is cross elasticity of demand. Let's look at them one after the other. Number one, price elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand measures the degree of responsiveness of demand to a change in price of the commodity, which means how will quantity demanded of a commodity be influenced by changes in price of the commodity. How do we calculate price elasticity of demand? The formula for price elasticity of demand is on your screen. As you can see, price elasticity of demand is percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price. The important thing you need to know about price elasticity of demand is that it has an absolute sign, which means the answers we get can never be negative. If you have a negative answer, you remove the negative value and make sure your answers are positive. Let's look at what we call point elasticity of demand. Point elasticity of demand measures the degree of responsiveness of demand of a commodity to a change in a particular price of the commodity. So point elasticity of demand is change in quantity demanded divided by change in price multiplied by first price over first quantity. So point elasticity of demand is usually used to solve questions in OBJ. So for JAMB students, it's usually advised to use point elasticity of demand. For YX students, it's usually advised to use it in OBJ. You only use point elasticity of demand for OBJ questions. Let's look at the types of price elasticity of demand. So types of price elasticity of demand will enable us to analyze and interpret the elasticity of demand of a commodity. Number one is fairly elastic demand. Fairly elastic demand can also be called elastic demand. So it occurs when a change in price of a commodity leads to a greater change in quantity demanded of that commodity. So the coefficient of fairly elastic demand is usually greater than 1. So if you solve a question and the answer you get is greater than 1 without approximation to the nearest whole number, so if the answer you got is greater than 1, it means that the commodity has a fairly elastic demand. And a fairly elastic demand is usually for commodities that have close substitutes, which means they have alternative. Look at a diagram to explain. As you can see, the price decreased from 2 naira to 1 naira. At price 2, we have quantity 1. Law of demand, when the price fell to 1, quantity increased in greater measure to 3, which means that the percentage change in quantity is greater than that of percentage change in price. So the value we are going to have will be greater than 1. The second type of price elasticity of demand is fairly inelastic demand. Fairly inelastic demand can also be called inelastic demand, and it occurs when a change in price of a commodity leads to a lesser change in quantity demanded of that commodity. So it is meant for commodities without close substitutes. Examples are commodities that are of necessity. So the coefficient of fairly inelastic demand is usually lesser than 1. So if you solve a question without approximation to the nearest whole number and the answer you got is lesser than 1, it means the commodity has a fairly inelastic demand. Look at this diagram. The price fell from price 2 to price 1. At price 2, quantity 1 was demanded. When the price fell to price 1, quantity increased but in a lower measure, which means that the percentage change in quantity is lesser than percentage change in price. So we are going to have a coefficient lesser than 1. Let's look at the next one, which is unitary elastic demand. Unitary elastic demand occurs when a change in price of a commodity leads to an equal change in quantity demanded of that commodity, which means that percentage change in price and percentage change in quantity change in the same proportion. So the coefficient of unitary elastic demand will be equals to 1. As you can see on the diagram, price fell from price 2 to price 1. The percentage of falling is also the percentage of increase in quantity demanded, which means the coefficient is equals to 1. Let's look at the other one, which is perfectly elastic demand. Perfectly elastic demand occurs when different quantities of a commodity are demanded at a particular price. So when different quantities of a commodity, they are demanded at a particular price. So the coefficient is equals to infinity. So we can also call perfectly elastic demand infinite or elastic demand or infinitely elastic demand. As you can see on the diagram, we have our price, we have quantity demanded, we have our demand, which is infinite, which means that percentage change in price is constant, and we have percentage change in quantity. If we divide percentage change in price, if you divide percentage change in quantity by zero, you are going to have infinite. That's why we have perfectly elastic demand. The last type of price elasticity of demand is perfectly inelastic demand, and it occurs when a particular unit of a commodity is demanded at different prices. The coefficient is usually zero. So we can also call perfectly inelastic demand zero elastic demand. As you can see on the diagram, we have price, we have quantity demanded. As you can see, a particular unit of a commodity demanded at different prices, which means percentage change in quantity is zero, and we have different percentage change in prices. So what we are going to have is that we are going to have a zero elastic demand. Now let's look at number two type of elasticity of demand. Or before we look at the second type of elasticity of demand, let's look at the relationship between total revenue and price elasticity of demand. Total revenue is the entire income derived from units of goods sold by a firm. And the formula for total revenue is price times Q. And price elasticity of demand, it measures the degree of responsiveness of demand to a change in price of the commodity. If you look at the formula for price elasticity of demand and the formula for total revenue, you can see that price and quantity are common. All right. So now let's look at the relationship between total revenue and price elasticity of demand. Number one is that total revenue is inversely related to the price of a fairly elastic demand commodity, which means an increase in price of a fairly elastic demand commodity will lead to a decrease in total revenue of a producer, while a decrease in price of a fairly elastic demand will lead to an increase in total revenue of a producer. Don't forget that fairly elastic demand are commodities that have alternatives or substitutes. So if a producer increases the price of its commodities, the quantity demanded will change in greater measure, which means if a producer increases its price, quantity demanded will decrease drastically and the revenue will fall. And if the producer reduces the price, the quantity demanded will increase in greater measure and total revenue will increase. The second relationship is that total revenue is directly related to the price of a fairly inelastic demand commodity. So an increase in price will lead to an increase in total revenue, while a decrease in price will lead to a decrease in total revenue. Don't forget that I said earlier that fairly inelastic demand are for commodities that do not have alternatives or necessity. Let's use Nigeria as a case study. Petroleum products like petrol, all right, is an example of commodities that do not have alternative. Another example is electricity. If there's an increase in price of electricity, we don't have any other alternative. If there's an increase in price of fuel in Nigeria, consumers do not have alternative. Consumers will still buy, which means if producers of electricity products and producers of fuel want to make higher revenue from that product, all they need to do is to increase their price because consumers will still buy more. So that's what this is talking about. The last relationship is that total revenue has no relationship with unitary elastic demand. So an increase or decrease in price of a unitary elastic demand will have no effect on the total revenue of a producer. Now let's look at the second type of elasticity of demand, which is income elasticity of demand. Income elasticity of demand measures the degree of responsiveness of demand to a change in income of consumers, which means it explains how changes in income of consumers influence quantity of goods demanded by consumers. Let's look at the formula of income elasticity of demand. Income in economics is usually represented with Y. So YED, which means Y is income, E is elasticity, and D is demand. So YED represents income elasticity of demand, which is percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in income. So how do we analyze? How do we interpret income elasticity of demand? If you solve a question and the income elasticity of demand is positive but lesser than 1, it shows the commodity is a normal goods. All right, it shows the commodity is a normal good. If you solve a question and the income elasticity of demand is positive but greater than 1, it shows the commodity is an ostentatious good or a luxury good. I've explained normal goods, ostentatious goods, and luxury good earlier. Then, if income elasticity of demand is negative, it shows that the commodity is an inferior good. So this is how to analyze income elasticity of demand from the coefficient derived from your solving. Let's look at the last type of elasticity of demand, which is cross elasticity of demand. Cross elasticity of demand measures the degree of responsiveness of demand of a commodity to a change in price of another commodity, which means under cross elasticity of demand, we are looking at two commodities. We are looking at how change in quantity demanded of a commodity is being affected by price of another commodity. Now, how do we calculate cross elasticity of demand? How do we calculate cross elasticity of demand? The formula for cross elasticity of demand is given as percentage change in quantity demanded of commodity X divided by percentage change in price of commodity Y, which means you have two commodities. So a change in price of one will affect quantity demanded of the other commodity. So how do we analyze cross elasticity of demand? If you solve a question and the answer you got is positive, so if the answer you got is positive, it shows that the commodity is a competitive goods, or an example of a competitive goods is substitute. So if you solve a question and the commodity and the answer is negative, it shows that the commodity is complementary goods. Another name for complementary goods is joint products. If you solve a question and the answer you get is 0, it shows that there's no relationship between the two commodities. So this is how to analyze a cross elasticity of demand. I believe you've been able to understand demand as a topic. By now, you should know the laws of demand. All right, and you should know the demand schedule, demand curve. You should understand what is meant by types of demand. By now, you should know how to differentiate between change in demand and change in quantity demanded. You should know what is exceptional demand and the causes of exceptional demand. You should know what we call elasticity of demand, the types of elasticity of demand, the formulas to calculating the types of elasticity of demand, and how to analyze them. Till we see again in the next class. Bye for now.